Welcome to the webinar, everyone. Before we get started, I would like to just go over some technical information that's specific to the webinar platform, just in case a few of you are using it for the first time. So you should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop. To the left is the GoToWebinar Viewer, through which you will see the presentations. To the right is the GoToWebinar control panel, where you can ask questions and select audio mode preferences. You are listening using your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. If you see the orange arrow in the control panel on the right side of your screen, please feel free to right-click the orange arrow to have access to the entire control panel throughout this webinar. You are going to have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We are going to collect those and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. So now I'd like to introduce you to today's presenters. And before I do, I just want to remind everyone that we will be recording this webinar and we're going to email the recording to you. So feel free to share it with your colleagues and others in your community. So my name is Nicola Pavlich, and I have been a program manager at Cities of Service for 2 years now. Prior to Cities of Service, I held positions in local government and nonprofit sectors working on topics like diversity and inclusion, organizational development, and citizen engagement. We also have the dynamic duo from Kalamazoo with us today. First, we have Laura Lam, Deputy City Manager. Laura has over 15 years of experience working in the public sector, having led large-scale community revitalization strategies and managed innovative public-private partnerships to address systemic challenges to prosperity of the city. Joining Laura is Christina Anderson, City of Kalamazoo City Planner. Christina also brings a wealth of experience and knowledge to the city with her background as urban designer focused on sustainable development and as an advocate for sustainable and local food production. Following our Kalamazoo colleagues, we will hear from Tracy. Tracy Colunga is the Director of the Office of Civic Innovation for the City of Long Beach, California. Tracy's North Star has and continues to be community improvement. She has successfully helped the city garner $3.1 million to improve community safety and neighborhood livability gaps, as well as establish actionable plans to reduce violence, improve city's language access practices, and launch the My Brother's Keeper initiative. A warm welcome to our presenters, and thank you so much for making time to share your wisdom with us. Now, I'd like to go over the webinar agenda. Because we have a number of participants on the webinar who are new to Cities of Service, I'll provide a quick overview of the organization and of our citizen engagement model. Next, we will hear from Laura and Christina about their action-oriented master plan. Following Laura and Christina, we'll hear from Tracy about the ways she and her team inspired citizen ownership of 2 very different public spaces. We'll then dive into questions and answer. Please remember to submit your questions throughout the webinar. We will use the questions you submit to curate the Q&A portion of the webinar. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. You can see our mission up here on the screen. Cities of Service is a nonprofit organization that helps mayors build stronger cities by changing the way local government and citizens work together. We help our coalition tap into citizen insights, skills, and services to identify and solve critical public problems. Cities of Service was first launched by Mayor Michael Bloomberg in 2009 and modeled after the success of NYC Service. We were created to provide a new mechanism for citizen participation in local governance. We grew from an initial group of 16 founding mayors to a coalition of more than 260 cities. We now offer tailored technical assistance, funding, national and international visibility to our coalition cities. You will quickly see that we love to celebrate cities in our coalition because of the transformative and impactful work they are doing in partnership with their citizens. You have heard me use the word citizen a few times, and some of you might be thinking, Nicola, how does Cities of Service define citizen? Cities of Service does not define citizen in a legal sense. We see citizens as residents who actively participate in their community and who see themselves as an integral part of their city. On your screen is our citizen engagement model, which is the bedrock for how we as an organization view citizen engagement. We see citizen engagement as an ongoing activity, a muscle both city staff, leadership, and citizens flex consistently, which builds trust and in turn sustains engagement over time. For us, there are 5 key elements which lead to sustained engagement and increased trust between citizens and their government. The first 2 elements are leadership and identifying a challenge. We start with the belief that the elected city leaders have the perspective needed to identify the challenges of top priority for the city. Next is deliberation with the community. We believe it is important for cities to confirm that what they think is a problem is indeed a problem, and to see if the solution they're proposing makes sense for the community of focus. Next, it's all about getting to work. This is about working side by side with the citizens, getting your hands dirty, if you will. And lastly, it's time to show impact. We believe that measuring impact helps cities point to concrete results and tell the world how the partnership between the city and citizen has made a powerful difference. We do have a number of engagement strategies that fall within this model on our website. We refer to these engagement strategies as blueprints. After the webinar, I invite you to go to our website, check it out, and even look up some of our blueprints under the resource page. If you would like to learn more about the services we provide to our coalition cities, or if you are interested in joining our growing coalition, please feel free to reach out through the email on your screen. In addition, you can stay up to date on resources and our work through our newsletter and the social media platforms. And now here comes even a more fun part. Let's jump into the wisdom and expertise of our city representatives that are with us today. We will kick it off with Kalamazoo. In 2015, residents in Kalamazoo were not engaged with local government or local issues. During the 2010 master planning process, only 400 residents out of more than 74,000 living in Kalamazoo at that time participated. Today, you will hear what Laura and Christina did differently to change this narrative. In fact, they made some critical changes, and as a result, the Imagine Kalamazoo 2025 process reached more residents than ever before, an increase of 914% from the previous planning process. Not only did they increase participation, they also ensured that the input they gathered was actually used to inform goals and actionable actions. Laura and Christina, thank you very much for being here with us today. You have the presentation now. Christina and Laura, I think you might not be dialed in, and we can't hear you, unfortunately. That's okay. So while we, it seems to be that we are having some technical difficulty. So while we figure that out, I would love to switch over to Tracy, if you all don't mind. And we're going to start with Tracy first, and we'll come back to our Kalamazoo friends. So Tracy is with the City of Long Beach, as mentioned earlier. She is the Director for City of Long Beach Office of Civic Innovation. And her office actually partners with departments on several projects, including police recruitment, Long Beach Airport customer experience, Public Works Clean Long Beach, and the African American Cultural Center visioning process. And under her leadership, the Office of Civic Innovation worked closely with the Long Beach Police Department to understand trends and patterns of people cycling in and out of the justice system. The City of Long Beach launched the Long Beach Justice Lab to strategically break this cycle of incarnation. Needless to say, Tracy and her team work on very diverse, complex, and very interesting projects. Tracy, thank you for making time to pick 2 projects out of your portfolio and share the associated citizen engagement techniques in each project. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to your slides, and you will be able to make the presentation.
Great, welcome. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Nicola, for that really kind introduction, and just so happy to be here to talk with you all. Can you hear me okay, Nicola?
We can hear you.
Wonderful, great, okay. Well, happy to be here, and just quickly, our Office of Civic Innovation, we began in May of 2015 as an I-team through a Bloomberg Innovation Grant, and as of last October, have really embedded ourselves as internal consultants here in the City Manager's Office, as Nicola mentioned, to partner with departments and work on pressing problems for the city. And here you can see a beautiful picture of the City of Long Beach, and you're all always welcome to come visit our beautiful city at any time. What we'd like to do this morning is really highlight 2 projects. As you've heard, we have a pretty nice sized portfolio, but we wanted to look at 2 key projects where we've engaged the community and some of that meaningful engagement and some of the hard lessons we've had to learn in that process. So the first one we want to talk about is Harvey Milk Park. And about 5 years ago, our mayor appointed the Harvey Milk Park Equality Plaza Committee. This committee was made up of LGBTQ leaders to really both honor the legacy of Harvey Milk, who was the first openly gay elected official, but also to recognize our local leaders here in our city. And at the time, the park did not look like the picture you see in front of you. At the time, there was a lot of concrete, if you will, a little bit of grass. And what the Equality Plaza Committee really wanted to do is reimagine what the park could be like. So about 3 years ago, we landed a grant from the Knight Foundation, and in partnership with the Equality Plaza Committee, our LGBTQ leaders, Long Beach LLC, which is the developer who both owns and develops much of the property you're looking at in the current slide, as well as the Downtown Long Beach Alliance, made up of the various businesses in downtown Long Beach, and of course, city staff. We need public works, parks, planning, and economic development at the table. And through a 3-year process, we met almost on a monthly basis, really to gather community input about what should this park entail, what was the color schematic, where are we going to place the outdoor furniture, and really taking us through a creative process of co-creating a park, if you will. And I want to make sure and acknowledge Alma Castro was our project manager at the time, and she delicately, worked with these various groups who may have competing priorities, but found a really creative way to find a common ground about reinventing the space. And so one of the exciting things that we did is that we activated the space through pop-ups. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So through pop-up activation, this was a great way to gauge from people who live, work, and play around the park to understand, well, what types of activities would they like to see in the park? A couple of them included a lunch and learn where you could brown bag lunch and learn about different topical areas. We had busking, we had pop-up coffee, our mobile library came out, and we hosted these activations at different times of the day to really understand, what were the best times to host these various events, where did we have the most turnout, and just so everyone knows, lunchtime ended up being the time that we saw the most people come out for the various pop-up events. And then in addition to that, another creative feature was we actually put together a request for solutions, and we called the world, literally all over the world. We sent out a request for solutions. What kind of outdoor furniture could we potentially put in this park? And we received bids from companies all over the country. We also got a bid from Barcelona, where people pitched the idea of putting a ping pong table, a sofa bench, a charging station. And so from that request for solutions, we actually invited the 8 companies who bid to come for a week-long showcase where they could actually bring their wares, place them in the park, and then we created a text-to-vote opportunity. And the companies were wonderful, and they came out here. It was at no cost to the city, where they brought their wares out for a week. They shipped them out here, and we placed them throughout the park in coordination with our committee, and created this really cool text-to-vote application on each feature. And so people could sit on the bench or charge their phone, play ping pong. And the community, again, the people who live, work, and play around the park were able to come and text-to-vote their highest priorities. And some of the highest votes included the ping pong table was a big hit, because you can also pull up chairs and turn it into a quick boardroom table if you want to have an outdoor meeting. The sofa bench was a big hit, which has the charging station in it as well. And so based on the votes, the I-team then presented the findings to the committee, and they actually got to select the 3 top pieces of furniture using the Knight Foundation funding, of course, to purchase the furniture, to purchase the outdoor furniture. So from that, then we looked at how do we co-create the space. Again, you're looking at the renderings of how it exists now, but one of the things we learned early on from our LGBTQ leaders was the color flag coordination, if you will. Apparently, there had been various projects in the past that the cities worked on where we did not put the colors in the proper order. And so they really had to educate us, city, public works, parks, and others, that there is a proper order for the color schematic. And so they actually helped us decide where the color schematic would take place. They weighed in heavily on the placement of the stage, which you can see at the far end, as well as the soapbox. Harvey Milk was well known for his speeches and getting up on his soapbox. Also, something really fun and creative is we asked the committee for the top 10 quotes of Harvey Milk. And from those 10, then we actually pushed out a vote, online vote, where the community got to vote what was the final quote that would end up on the wall and the renderings at the potential park. And so really over the course of these 3 years, we worked very intimately with our community partners and community leaders to both decide which furniture would be purchased and where would it be positioned, how the honor wall, on the right-hand side, we have this beautiful honor wall where we honor our local LGBTQ leaders. They got to choose the color schematic as well as the layout for that honor wall. Every component of the planning of this park, they actually got to weigh in and provide their input. Now, I'll be honest, from a city perspective, it was a very arduous process. It was difficult at times because there may have been disagreements between the various committee members. But one of the things that we learned as a city was to just really sit, listen, and learn, and really be patient with this process, because at the end of the day, we now have this very beautiful park that both honors the legacy of Harvey Milk, but that many of our LGBTQ leaders can walk into the space and say, hey, I helped pick the honor wall. We're the ones that voted on that quote. We helped with the placement of the stage. And there's this real high sense of ownership, if you will. So moving on to our next slide, this is our most recent Equality Plaza Committee award ceremony, and these were 3 of our LGBTQ leaders that were honored just this last May. And Harvey Milk Park is also known as a place where leaders can come and really talk about the modern day concerns. So for instance, there was a group that started an immigration rights rally this last Saturday. They started here at the park, and then they walked to our local Homeland Security federal building. And so Harvey Milk Park has been known as a place where, of course, we can have fun and enjoy life, but also as a place where we can have really difficult conversations in the community about what's happening both locally and nationally. And in our last slide, I want to highlight the leadership of our mayor. This project has been very near and dear to his heart. He's our first Latino openly gay mayor, and you see him here at the ribbon cutting, where he both honors the legacy of Harvey Milk, but also the pride that we have in our city with our LGBTQ community. So that wraps up our overview of Harvey Milk, and now I'd like to pivot over to Clean Long Beach. So this is a project we've been working on for the last 18 months, and like many cities across the country, illegal dumping or dumping of large bulky items has become a really key issue in some of our neighborhoods throughout the city. And so the I-team was asked to look at this issue and start to understand root causes. our research question we developed was, what are the quantitative and qualitative measures for a public-private partnership to reduce waste in a shared urban space? And for the purposes of today's call, I'm really going to focus on the qualitative measures, although you'll see some of the quantitative findings as well. But I really want to focus on the conversations that we had with our community members to understand the root causes of illegal dumping. So here what you'll see is we partner closely with a Harvard fellow to really take a deep dive research and understand the analytics behind illegal dumping. And the map on the right, what you see is where we have higher density, we have higher amounts of illegal dumping. And there's a strong correlation between renters who live in these particular neighborhoods and a disconnect around information sharing about how to properly dispose of these large bulky items such as mattresses and TVs, furniture, large pieces of furniture, if you will. And so that really helped the I team understand that we wanted to take time, you can move on, it's okay, to the next slide. We wanted to take a deep dive in the 6 neighborhoods that had the most illegal dumping. So some of the things we did included partnering closely with Cal State University, Long Beach, and Masters of Social Work students. They had to do an applied project. And so we partnered with their class and divvied up in groups of 5 to 6 students in partnership with the I team. And we did observational interviews where we went out throughout the week at different times of the day to observe where is illegal dumping happening. And then also to interview residents both on the street or at the local grocery store to ask them, why do you think people dump items? What are some of the root causes? As well as we interviewed community leaders and neighborhood association presidents to really understand from them, how could we work together? And one of the interesting findings is that although we, the city, saw this issue of illegal dumping, some of our neighborhoods, like Adams neighborhood, said, we know illegal dumping is an issue in our vacant lots, but more important than that, we have a need for community mental health and youth programming. Is there some way the city could come here and start to develop these types of programs? Because a lot of our young people are hanging out in the park or the neighborhood, and it seems like they don't have enough positive activities to be involved in. So that was a huge aha moment for us as a team, and even as a city, that sometimes we think what the problem, the presenting problem is, the community may view a different problem as a higher priority. Also, AOC 7, they're a wonderful group. They really talked about this idea of placemaking. How can we reinvent space in our alleyways? There's a couple alleys in that neighborhood that have illegal dumping, and looking at cities like New York and Toronto, other cities who've reinvented alleyways as active places, and they're actively engaged right now in both cleaning up that alleyway and beginning to activate it. We can move on to our next slide. Sunny Central talked about what would it be like if we had a neighborhood dump site, if there was one location where people knew they could go and dump their items. Again, this piece of lack of education or information about how to properly dispose of items. And one last thing on this slide, the Washington neighborhood, while it's not listed here, I do want to mention that in our interviews with the neighborhood youth and leaders in that neighborhood, they said, you know, city, yes, illegal dumping is an issue here, but you know what's more pressing for us is the gangs that hang out in the local park. You know, we're nervous about our kids walking to and from school, that they'll get jumped into the gang or that they'll be offered drugs. And while we know you're here to interview us about these illegal dumping, we're more concerned about the safety of our children. And again, for the I team, that was a huge aha moment. And we were able to provide the findings from that research to our local health department, who's engaged right now in the Washington neighborhood in a Safe Long Beach Violence Prevention program to really partner with the community and build robust community engagement around violence prevention. So moving on to the next slide. Another exciting thing that we did is that we also got to do these observations through a private setting on Instagram. And what we did is we went out every single day, Monday through Friday, for 4 weeks straight. We would go, different team members would go at different times. So we had an 8 a.m. crew, a noon crew, and then the 5 p.m. crew. And we'd go in teams of 2. And basically what we would do is take pictures of where the illegal dumping occurred. This private sending on Instagram both allowed us to timestamp when these things were happening and also locate where they consistently happened. And so some of the themes, when we really start to look at the pictures and our note taking from those observations, what we found is the first one you see is human behavior. If one person dumped an item in one location, then 3 or 4 other people would dump their items there as well. They became these, honorary locations where you could illegally dump items, if you will. Another thing we saw was a lot of public health hazards, and that the alleys were not very clean in this particular neighborhood. So to couple that, moving on to the next slide, not only did we want to observe the neighborhood, but we wanted to talk to the haulers, the owners, and the residents, every level of the system, to understand what are the issues, why is illegal dumping occurring, how can we co-create solutions to begin to deter illegal dumping in these neighborhoods. And one of the biggest findings we found was public education. In an earlier slide, you saw 60 to 70% of the people we interviewed did not know how to properly dispose of large bulky items. This includes both the property managers as well as the community residents. So this component around public education and resident landlord communication, how can we support and encourage landlords with education materials so that they can encourage residents to properly dispose of these bulky items. And then another theme that came up over and over was activating public space. How can we create community gardens, activate vacant lots? What are some creative things that we can do to activate space that would then ultimately deter dumping in specific locations? So on this next slide, what you see is our long-term solution. So after our 18-month research and conversation with our various city partners, community partners, and others who are involved in this process, I'm just going to highlight a few key findings that we're moving forward with. One is educating property owners and renters. So we're in the process right now of actually helping Public Works revamp their website, as well as all of their campaign education campaign material, so that it's both multilingual but very community friendly, using a lot of infographics, simple words, easy to understand ways to properly dispose of those items. And we're actually partnering with a few of the neighborhoods to test out the campaign to make sure that the language is not too wonky or too policy oriented, but it's very simple. Here are the 3 steps that you can do to get rid of that big mattress or furniture from your house or apartment. Also, we've been empowering our community leaders to activate space, both through leveraging CDBG grants, also introducing our community leaders to various departments so they can leverage these relationships to be able to activate space. One exciting conversation where we're having right now with this is the County Department of Mental Health wants to fund a mental health mobile clinic that could potentially be housed in the Adams neighborhood at a local park Monday through Friday. Again, it's activating space and providing some of those much needed services that the community told us that they needed. And last but not least, prioritizing our scheduled pickup over collections over illegal dumping. What we found through our research was that the illegal dumping would occur and people would report it on our hotline or a Go Long Beach application, and within 24 hours those items would get picked up. But then the other neighbors who would call in and do it the correct way, if you will, they oftentimes would have to wait anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks to have their items picked up. So really correcting the system so that we're prioritizing our pickups and really leveraging the resources that we have so that everyone has a positive response in terms of illegal dumping and coming for pickups. So on our next slide, just to really culminate the conversation, these were some of the key bullet points or takeaways that I would like to encourage our participants to think about today, is the importance of sitting and listening. So as we've met with many of our community leaders around the city, especially in those 6 neighborhoods, just sitting and listening to some of their concerns, their ideas, and validating that their experience is their experience, and really being empathetic. They may view the city or the system in one way, And it's important for us as city employees to listen to their concerns and to think creatively about how we can translate that into action. You know, a lot of times community members will complain about what they want to see the city do differently. And some of the responses I've given is, how can we work together? How can we co-create solutions? This is not only a city problem, this is not only a community problem, but how do we make this our problem that we then solve together? And then this concept of acting. This is very important as well, because oftentimes we as cities are known to go out and we're going to have a focus group or a community meeting or a town hall, and the community gets to tell us about all their problems, and then we just take those problems back to City Hall and we keep working on whatever projects we were assigned to. And so this concept of acting and moving projects forward and making sure that we're circling back to whether it be the appropriate department or neighborhood in terms of good follow-up and follow-through. And apologize when needed. You know, this has actually come up several times, both in the illegal dumping interviews about what the city does and doesn't do, or non-responsive. And I have found myself oftentimes apologizing on behalf of the city. Right now, we're engaged in the visioning process for our African American Cultural Center, and many of our African American community leaders have voiced to us who are working on this project that the city has for decades neglected and negated that particular population. And I think it's a very appropriate position for us as city staff to apologize on behalf of the city. And while that was the case for many decades, we're in a new era with new leadership that values the input of our community residents. And we apologize for our past sins, if you will, and we're ready and willing to engage in this new conversation about co-creating solutions with the community. And last but not least, keep talking. Keep those lines of communication open. Many of these community leaders call me, email me. They have other questions about how to navigate through our bureaucracy, if you will. And so it's important to keep talking with our community members and our community leaders so they see the city not just as this city hall of these four walls, but they actually see that we're human beings that also live, work, and play in the great city of Long Beach, and we care deeply about the change in our city as well. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm sure at the end, if there's other questions that you have about our work here in the city, I'd be happy to answer them.
Tracy, thank you so much for the time you spent to take this complex work and put it in such easy to understand and follow presentation. And to all of our participants, you'll see that all of our presenters have very complex jobs, but they've taken the time to kind of bring out the best nuggets in front of all of us here today. So one of the things that I really loved about Tracy's presentation are the different techniques that she mentioned the city use. They used the leadership in a strategic way. Never forget that your leaders are also ways for you to get public out and interested in what you're doing. Technology was used. They used Instagram, text to vote. I loved the prototyping example of putting different furniture out, seeing how people interact with it. And then we all put committees together in our cities. And what was interesting to me is that Long Beach ensured that the committee that they were putting together was representative of the population that was impacted by the opportunity or problem they were trying to address. And then lastly, we've heard surveys used a lot in our communities. I love that Long Beach did interviews and they did observations. So it was a different way to get out there in the community and gather the input that you usually need to make decisions. So Tracy, thank you very much for your leadership and your time to be with us here today. I would like to now switch it over to our friends in Kalamazoo, and I'm going to go ahead and move the presentation over to their beginning slides. And as I do that, I would also love to just remind everyone of who our presenters are and what their challenge was. So we have our Deputy City Manager, Laura, with us, and the City Planner, Christina Anderson. And their work revolved around their master planning process. Their old process only engaged 400 residents, and the changes Laura, Christina, and their team made actually resulted in an increase of 914% of participants from the previous process. But what's also really cool and relevant is that not only did they increase participation, they ensured that the input they collected was actually used to inform goals and associated actions. So Laura and Christina, you are unmuted, and we would love to hear from you now.
Great, thank you very much. So Christina and I are going to talk about Imagine Kalamazoo 2025 and our efforts to create not only a new strategic vision, a master plan, overhaul the way our city does engagement and interacts with our community, and turns plans into realities. As you just referenced, in 2015, we were looking to update our master plan from 2010. This former process, we had about, as you mentioned, 400 people involved. It was very consultant driven. We had traditional town hall style meetings inviting people to come to us, and it resulted in a plan that largely sat on a shelf, over 130 action items that saw very little action. So we figured before we start down this road and update this plan that I just discussed, we wanted to reflect on why hadn't this been successful. And a couple things came to mind. We recognized that our strategic vision, the overarching vision for the city, was 15 years old and very outdated. We also recognized that our master plan was not at all anchored in the vision, nor was it linked to our budget really in any way. Lastly, we didn't have nearly enough community fingerprints on the plan. We weren't sure if we had the right priorities. We weren't able to really build the excitement, and most importantly, we didn't create the ownership for the implementation with the community. And so to make sure that we were going to achieve that, we needed to make sure that we did not follow the typical curve of master plan transactions, where we kind of get fatigued, right? We are so excited, we celebrate our plan, and then what happens, right? We kind of fall down this curve of complacency. We're not very strategic about implementing all these goals. Often we have too many. We've essentially checked the box. The state told us we needed a master plan, so we did it, and we spent all this time and money doing it, not for it to be effective. We knew that we couldn't go down that curve of complacency, and that we needed to be on our own curve, which we called the curve of transformation. We needed to know that we need to set ourselves up with an overarching strategic vision, yay, right? Something that would guide everything, making sure that the master plan that we would create would align with that, and neighborhood plans and any other 5-year or 1-year plan were all fitting together and moving our community forward with one motion. So, as Laura stated, we started this process, right? And because we are updating our plan not in the right order, right? Master plans in Michigan need to be done every 10 years. We checked in at 5, saw it wasn't working, and needed to restart a process. We didn't really have a budget or a set plan on how we were going to move forward. So this was really a staff-driven kind of grassroots effort. So we started our engagement by popping up all over the community and sharing other events and asking broad questions like, you know, what's a world-class city? Imagine Kalamazoo in the year 2025. What would it be? And, you know, we asked these broad questions. If you are holding a block party, we showed up. Art sales, we showed up. You name it, we were there. And knowing that we needed to build capacity wherever we could, we partnered with our local universities to think about ideas. And this is an example of one that students came up with from Kalamazoo College, the Living Wall, which allowed a very portable tool to show up all over the place, whether it was a Easter egg hunt, as was here, the train station, homeless shelters, schools, with easy tools to garner community input and ideas. If we showed up at an art event, we had people do drawings. If we were working with kids, we did kid-friendly activities. And of course, we did traditional surveys to kind of round it out. And it was so critical for us to use all of our resources that we had in the community, that already existed in the community. So we had a 70-person, yes, you heard that right, 70-person working group for this project. And this wasn't a working group that just kind of sat in a room with us and said, yes, that's the right next step. We empowered these residents to go out and speak to their friends, family, and coworkers to have these conversations. We created this meeting on a go kit that you can see before you. And it was a way to, how do you start a conversation about your city? How do you record that information? How do you troubleshoot the conversation? And then at the end of it, how do you get it back to the city? And at first we thought we'd maybe get 40 back. We were mistaken. And, you know, knitting circles, running groups, coworkers at lunch groups all participated in this, and we had hundreds returned. What this meant is that we got a lot of information. Too much, well, you can never have too much information, but a lot of information for us to be able to process.
And so here we took a pause. This was our process. We were driving the bus, so we had the opportunity to take stock in what we had heard, and realized with the quantity of information that we got, we needed some help to go through it, and we were free. So we strategically used our limited funds to build our capacity here for data analysis, and worked with a firm called Public Agenda out of New York to help us sort the skittles, as it were, to kind of get this data organized, understand who said it, where we heard it from, and what were the rising themes. And it was through this sorting of skittles that allowed us to say, you know what, here, I know what we need to do next. Because again, we weren't driven by that traditional consultant project that set a certain number of meetings at a certain time in the process. We were able to kind of adjust as we went along. So we knew that we needed to take all this information, the rising themes, and go back out to the community. And so we held 2 large format meetings in different parts of the community where we asked residents to confirm what we heard and help us start to prioritize it and refine these themes. And these meetings were very well attended and gave us a lot of ideas. In fact, some clear themes started to rise to the top. And it was a great kind of midpoint for our process where we heard some of the key things that everyone wanted to hear. What was also important about this conversation is the conversation shifted without us. The community started to shift to thinking about these great overarching themes that relate to imagining Kalamazoo of the future. What does that mean for my neighborhood? What does connectivity mean for where I work? And so, again, we paused, took stock of what we were hearing, and realized that the community had already turned the page and was going in a different direction, and we needed to follow them with a roadshow. And so we set up 12 meetings throughout the city in a matter of 3 months to kind of continue this engagement journey. And this allowed us to pop up where the community wanted us to, right? So we tailored each of these meetings to the neighborhood. We showed up in the community locations that were most important to them: schools, churches, community centers. We advertised for these meetings the way that best fit that neighborhood, and we figured that out by talking to the neighborhood. Where's your community board? Which church has the bulletin that most people read? Oh, everyone has a little lending library? Okay, how do we get our flyers for our upcoming meeting in that? Because that's where people go in your neighborhood, and we want to make sure that we're maximizing all tools to get us there. And so we really tailored both the outreach for these meetings as well as the activities themselves. And we knew that at this point, because the conversation had already shifted to neighborhoods, that we need to find a very simple tool to take the themes and allow people, whether they are 8 or 80, to apply them to their neighborhood. And the best way to do that is with markers and maps. And so we created a really simple key and said, tell us about your neighborhood. And this is an example as for a transportation question that we asked. Where do you bike? Where do you walk? How do you get to school? What streets are scary when you try to cross them? And we had actually a lovely story of an 8-year-old boy drawing his route to school and where he got nervous and where he didn't like to cross. At the end of the day, through all of our neighborhoods, we got these great maps that showed what was on the ground. And we pull these out to this day. Where did we hear that there were sidewalk issues? Did we get these potholes managed, as a side note? So at the end of this process, we engaged to the well was dry. And we resulted with a lot of comments that we need to figure out how to absorb into our documents moving forward. And so we had this pledge to ourselves that everyone came out to these meetings and participated in our surveys, and we need to make sure that nothing they said ever got left behind. So to that end, all the high-level comments, 45,000 feet above the city, overarching goals went into our strategic vision. At the next level, maybe 30,000 feet looking at the city, specific to land use and transportation mostly, things like, I want a better connected neighborhood, safe routes to school, how do I get to downtown? Those comments went directly into our master plan. When we heard fix the pothole on my street, I want more wayfinding to get to my commercial center, I want community gardens, those are neighborhood scale things. And that was already the sign that we needed to do a process after the master plan of neighborhood planning to kind of figure out what this all meant on the ground. And then all other topics went into our other 5-year plan. So we were ready to go when those are needed to be updated, whether it was the HUD Consolidated Plan or the Parks and Rec Plan.
So ultimately, over the course of the process, we had more than 4,000 voices shape Imagine Kalamazoo, 10 times what we'd had in the previous process. In addition to just having our numbers increase, we were able to heal a lot of the broken trust that had been in the community. We were able to get, as Christina's mentioned, a lot of great information, and we were able to find ways to shape our actions and our budget allocations based on what we heard and what plan or process we were able to insert it to. We were able to develop a vision to implement. Staff were able to receive clear direction on what was most important to the community. And lastly, we generated a ton of excitement, significant excitement at every single level of the community. With this positive momentum, it translated into a huge opportunity for us. As we were going through this process to craft this new vision, we had our residents thinking about the Kalamazoo for the future. We actually had an unprecedented gift or a grant for the city, where a year into the process, we received a commitment of $70 million from philanthropic leaders, 30 of which was pledged to support the direct implementation of Imagine Kalamazoo. To date, we have allocated over $25 million directly related to the priorities we heard from the community members that we spoke with. And the way that we were able to get this started, to translate what the community said into actual actionable things, and I think it was great that Tracy talked about this too. Action is a big part of this, right? We don't plan to plan, we plan for action. We needed to make sure that we were set up internally. And so in order to do that, we needed to make sure that our people, our processes, and our plans were ready for us to kind of be able to keep us going. So as it relates to people, we needed to make sure that everyone saw themselves in this engagement process, in this planning process. So plan commission, zoning board, those citizen boards knew what their role was, that we had the right staff in the right place, and if we didn't, what training do we need to provide them to make sure that they could get the work done that the community had laid out for us. Process, very important. We needed to make sure that we were putting our money where the community's mouth was. So our budgets needed to reflect these goals. And if we were asking for money in the budget that didn't meet the strategic vision or the master plan, why is that? And should it really be there? And data, of course, because we are always pausing and checking to make sure that we are moving forward. And if we're not moving forward, how do we fix it and fix it quickly? Finally, plans. And we've talked a little bit about this. We went through this very long engagement process, came up with an incredible strategic vision and master plan, but we were never going to achieve that if all of our work, all of the everyday work, whether it's the one-year budget, capital improvement plans, or our 5-year plans for Parks and Rec, housing, shared prosperity in Kalamazoo, didn't also align with that process. So what we wanted to talk about was one great way, when you're all set up, and you have your house in order, you can start to do the implementation and the fun things. And for us, that started with neighborhood plans. And we talked a little bit about making sure that we had the right staff in the right place. And that was something that one of the first actions that we did was make sure that we had a neighborhood activator. And a neighborhood activator for us in Kalamazoo is part community outreacher, if that is a word, part planner, part therapist, part superhero, because this is a lot of work. This is taking that 10,000 looking above the city view and bringing it down to the block. Neighborhood master plans are often a very intangible document. You know, you may participate in the process, but you aren't always going to see how it impacts your daily life. And what neighborhood planning allowed us to do is take those intangible concepts. You know, I want a more connected city. I want our neighborhoods to be more connected. I want to be able to get to downtown and think about, well, what does that mean when someone walks out of their house? And, you know, we started the neighborhood planning process immediately after Imagine Kalamazoo Master Plan was completed, and started with the data that we heard. So we were telling the community, we heard you, and now we need to know how this works in your neighborhood. We immediately got 5 neighborhood plans done in the first year, which is why our neighborhood activator is a superhero underneath it all. But we always need to make sure that we're setting ourselves up for that. Again, we don't plan to plan, we plan for action. So how are we going to make sure that those neighborhood plans got the community further? Because that was the point. So that involves a lot of city support. And our neighborhood planner actually acted almost as a consultant for the neighborhoods. These were ultimately the neighborhood plans. And so we needed to make sure that the lessons that we learned through Imagine Kalamazoo were then translated into these neighborhood plans. And so we created a community engagement toolkit,
which said, okay, here are all the different ways you can engage. You can do a survey, you can do a meeting, you can do a web survey, you can do a paper survey. Here's the cost, here's their effectiveness, here's how they can best be used. We then went a step further and said, we appreciate that these engagement tools can have a cost. And so we're willing, if you're willing to do this engagement with us, to provide you with a stipend, whether it is for printing out surveys, whether it is because your neighborhood needs childcare to make sure that folks come to your meetings, whether you need to provide food, whatever it is, we have some dollars that we can help you with this. Further, throughout our neighborhood plans, we had small dollar amounts for little projects that would help keep the planning process going, to show that what residents who continued to come out to these meetings with what they said translated into action, and at the end of the process, that they were able to have some quick wins, get those bike racks that they wanted, or new bus benches, or support the creation of a corridor improvement authority if that's what the neighborhood wanted. And so there's another way that we wanted to make sure that we were supporting these plans, and that's through our work, our everyday work. So we've talked all along that this is all about alignment, right? So the master plan said, as many master plans do, we need to fix our zoning ordinance. We need to remove the barriers so they can get to the development that this master plan talks about. But that's a pretty hefty activity. So we relied on our neighborhood plans to refine that work for us. We have one neighborhood that said, we're really concerned about making sure that folks, especially our African-American and low-income residents, can open businesses within our neighborhood. We quickly learned by looking at the neighborhood and the zoning that was going to be pretty difficult because there are a lot of zoning barriers because of obsolete zoning in the area. And so we were able to work with that neighborhood as soon as their plan was done to change their zoning to allow them to open up the types of businesses in the locations that best matched their neighborhood. And that was something that we were able to do right away because of the neighborhood plan. So we hit the neighborhood plan goal and the master plan goal. So at the end of the day, what did we learn through all this process? And we should be clear that this process is not done, right? This is about continuous community engagement. Master plan is long ball. This is a 10-year activity, and so we have a lot to do, and we really have been trying to set ourselves up for success in these first 3 years. But about the process itself, I think there are 6 things that we really learned that we wanted to make sure that we shared. The first one is make the engagement timeline as flexible as possible. Whether you're doing this in-house or with a consultant, make sure that there is room to make sure that you are not cutting off voices that should participate. 2 is pause. Pause to assess what was said, pause to track who's involved, and adjust. There's no reason to continue down a path if it is not working. 3 is go to the people. We feel that we were very successful in a lot of our meetings because we did not stay at City Hall and ask people to come to us. We went out into the community and learned what worked for each one and changed tactics accordingly. At any meeting, there's no comment off limit that is off limits. If someone wants to talk about third shift childcare at that meeting, excellent. We will talk about third shift childcare at that meeting and then figure out what bucket it goes in later for how we're going to get a resolution to that issue. Make the process successive. Build off each step and make sure folks understand that the city is listening to what they said and has more questions. They want to build. They need to get to the right details in order to capitalize on that. And finally, understand that things will not always go well. Just having the meeting and checking the box is not enough. If the meeting doesn't go well, you may need to repeat. You may need to try something else. And those were our big 6 takeaways from our process.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Laura and Christina. Every city does some form of citywide planning, and we just loved how your city informed the master plan through citizen engagement from both the high level, but also the neighborhood specific levels you just mentioned. And we also appreciate that you didn't stop there. You ensured that the input that you gathered was integrated into short to long-term plans, but then you surrounded those plans by necessary resources so the citizens could see quick and meaningful action that's resulting from their earlier engagement. Just wonderful work. And again, just like Tracy, thank you for taking such a robust process and breaking it down in such simple ways that we can follow through. I'm going to go ahead and move towards the end of our webinar here so we can get to your questions. And before we do that, I just want to quickly recap what we heard during the webinar today. For me, there were three main themes that stood out the most. While each of the presenters used a variety of engagement techniques from technology, prototyping, interviews, strategically integrating leadership, I did hear a few themes. One was around ensuring that the engagement with citizens results in visible and felt action. Engagement shouldn't just be a spectator sport or an exercise in dialogue. I also heard how important it is to pick techniques that you can do where your citizens already convene or live, but it also matters how you show up. For example, you could prototype a solution to a problem at a local community center or neighborhood nonprofit, but ensuring that childcare is covered so that parents who work or in the area who have kids can also participate is equally as important as the technique. And then lastly, I heard that the presenter's emphasis on ongoing communication with citizens after the initial engagement is over. And what Kalamazoo did is they went beyond just communication. They also allocated money for citizens to take action around things that they wanted to do. So with that said, I want to thank the presenters again. And now we want to open it up to the questions from our participants. We're seeing a number of questions come through. So I'm going to take a minute to look through them and we can start curating them. So one question was, when it comes to using Instagram, were there any illegal or legal challenges or under issues that you were facing? And Tracy, you are unmuted if you want to share.
Sure. No, there were no legal issues. I think what we did as a, out of respect for Public Works, we kept it as a private setting that we did share with the Deputy Director of Public Works and his team so that they could also see where the illegal dumping was happening. Was it adjacent to city bins or private hauler bins? But we did not have any legal ramifications for that. Again, I'm proud of my team. It actually wasn't my idea. I have to give kudos to Harrison Wynn, who was our designer back then. It was actually his idea about how we could use this potential private setting on Instagram to be able to photo document the process.
And were there any privacy issues with Instagram as a tool?
No, we did not have any privacy issues for that particular prototype.
Cool. Another question is, and this might be for all of you, is when inviting the community to come to a meeting, what is the best way to reach a wide variety of local residents? Some older people may not be online, etc. How can we best ensure we hear from various populations?
So this is Christina in Kalamazoo. So we did a variety of things. At the neighborhood level, during Imagine Kalamazoo, when we went on our road show, if there was a senior complex or apartment building, we dropped off flyers at the management office. Again, we used churches and church bulletins. We always do social media, but we used pegboards that were, community sounding boards. We had materials translated into Spanish. We kind of based it on the population, that neighborhood's population that we were trying to reach out to. And I think that you need to use a variety of techniques because even though I'm on social media, what if I miss that one, right? And so it's good to kind of make sure that they're seeing it everywhere.
All right, awesome. And there's a big thank you to everyone, and then a thank you for Tracy. Someone is wondering, for a city that has not yet had the experience like yours, how would you describe the rewards, more tangible returns on investment of time, resources, and efforts you took? This is in regards to the Harvey Park, of taking this more intentional and inclusive process. So how did you justify the amount of time and resources it took?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I definitely want to go back to one of the things that Nicola said early on, which is around the engagement of, our top elected officials, the mayor, the city council, our city manager, and, working on those high priority projects for them at times can be challenging because you do definitely want the community engaged and you want their voice. But the return on investment, this was a project that was very near and dear to the mayor, who obviously doesn't have time to take care of the day-to-day development of a park design. And so, you know, both having those, you know, monthly meetings and conversations, their emails, phone calls, you know, in between, but also circling that process back to the mayor and city manager. We provided ongoing updates to mayor and city manager throughout the entire process so that they were very aware of what was happening at every step, so that they were both hearing it from city staff, and then if they were out in a community meeting, they could hear the same information and basically not be surprised. But I would definitely say the return on investment, again, it was a 3-year process that at times there were some of us city staff were like, I think this is the never ending project, right? However, on the day of the grand opening, a lot of us also shared that we wouldn't change any step of it, because we felt like all those LGBT community leaders up on stage with the mayor doing the ribbon cutting really felt this sense of ownership to this park, you know, that they helped, provide input on. One of the things I failed to mention, which I want to say, is we also have Measure A, which is funding for parks and filling potholes and repairing city buildings. And so we also thank the community residents for voting for Measure A, because some of that funding went towards the construction or reconstruction of the park as well.
Fantastic. And I see that we are at time and there are additional questions that are coming through. So we can put you in touch with the presenters. We can also help answer questions as well. So please do stay in touch with us here at Cities of Service. Once again, I want to give a huge thank you to our wonderful presenters for your wealth of information and commitment to engaging citizens in local government. I noticed that there were some questions about where can you see this webinar afterwards. You are going to get an email with a link where you can watch this webinar later. As a reminder, you are welcome to let us know what you thought of the webinar as well, so that we can continue improving our webinar offerings. With that said, thank you all for being with us today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Bye.